Welcome to Thrive, the podcast. It's through relationships that we receive the most powerful mirror of our relationship to ourselves and life. So if you're experiencing disconnection, conflict, discord, or oscillation in your relationships and are ready to address this now so that you can go on to thrive, join me in my 6-week live immersion, Thrive in Relationships. Today I'm speaking with Bridget Finklaire, spiritual teacher and author of Red Dress, published by John Holt Publishing. What's so extraordinary about Bridget's story is that she had no plans to become an author. Neither did she have plans to leave England and start a whole new life in Cape Town, South Africa, where she lives today. So in this episode, Bridget takes us on the epic adventure of being unfulfilled with all the trappings of a successful life in London, yet being deeply unhappy, to creating a life she didn't even know she was born for, where her cup overflows with magic. So Bridget, welcome to Thrive, the podcast. And I just want to take this moment to acknowledge the life you've created for yourself in Cape Town. You know, what struck me about your story is that it's a considerably brave thing to do, to have, almost raised your whole family and lived a whole life in England and then choose a completely unknown adventure. Because as I understand it, you didn't really know people in Cape Town at the time. It was in a whole new country for you. So I'd love on this podcast to share with listeners the journey that you took to have the courage inside of yourself to go for something so radically different and new, and some of the challenges that you faced on the way of realizing this new life for yourself and living, in the fullness of your true nature, your opulence and your joy and your vivaciousness. And as I understand it, life used to look quite different to that.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much, Liz, for inviting me onto your Thrive podcast. It's really wonderful to be here and talk to you. So let's begin at the beginning, I guess, of this huge journey that I took. So we need to just rewind a little bit to 2000. No, I think actually rewind a little bit before that, even to around 2009. So in 2009, I was living what probably most people would deem a successful life. And I think sometimes we need to redefine what is success. I had the big house, I had the beautiful convertible car, I had the 2 children, a boy and a girl, at very good schools. I was living in West London near the River Thames with my tall, dark, handsome man, husband, earning lots of money and having what ostensibly appeared to be a good life on the outside. But it wasn't as it appeared on the outside. On the inside, it wasn't working. On the inside, we were terribly mismatched. And on the inside, there was a lot of dysfunction within that relationship. It was very stressful and strained. I myself was a therapist at the time in Harley Street, so I could see what was going on. And the more I went on my journey of unfoldment and of learning and of growing, which is really what I think life is all about, and letting go of trauma, letting go of the past, the further I drifted away from my ex. And it became really obvious that I needed to leave. And I was quite scared of leaving, but I left. Now, when I left, that triggered a whole reaction from my ex, who was quite a powerful man and quite an angry man. And he decided to make, I think he decided, it felt like it from my perspective, that he decided to make my life as difficult as possible. So I effectively ended up as a single mum with 2 teenage kids. They were 15 and 17 at the time, trying to sell a house. And I won't even go into the details of what the climate was like at that time. There was a hung parliament at that time and house prices froze and the housing market stopped, and I was lumped with this huge house with an enormous mortgage, working as a therapist to pay everything and burning out.
Wow.
And about a year, it took me about a year to sell that house for the whole thing to go through. And over that year, I just got progressively more and more burned out, looking after kids on my own and supporting them and supporting a house that was too big for me. and trying to sell it. And I remember at one point having gallstones, and I wound up in A&E at the hospital. And the doctor said, "You are so stressed and under so much pressure. If you don't stop, you could be really seriously ill." Well, I didn't stop for another couple of years. We sold that house and we moved to a flat in the Clapham Junction, Battersea area of London. And I proceeded to carry on as a single parent, really looking after my kids. They never really saw their father. I mean, they were in communication with him then. They might see him at a restaurant on a Sunday afternoon, but they never went to his house. It was never a shared thing. So I was very much a single parent, holding it all together, and holding it together in Harley Street with clients that, some of which, not all of them, but some of which had very, very challenging lives. And they themselves were not challenging, but their cases were challenging. So it's challenging for me to work with things like rape and abuse and people, what I used to call a hole in the soul, where they've had a really difficult childhood with a lot of adverse childhood events. And you're holding a space for them to grow, to heal, to resolve trauma. And that's a big space to hold. And I'm working evenings, because people tend to want us to work evenings. I'm working flat out so that I've got the money to support us all. And I'm still looking after teenage kids. And really I was burning out, and I knew I was burning out. I could watch. We disassociate when we go through times like that. So there's a part of ourselves that's always watching, that's the witness. And that witness was drawing back and watching me burn out and just going, "You're going to burn out, you're going to pay the price for this, physically." And all I could do was try and manage it. So I would try to do yoga every day. I'd try to go for a walk every day. I'd meditate every day. I'd eat really healthily. I'd take supplements. I wouldn't drink coffee, that sort of thing. But it got towards the end where I was actually drinking coffee to keep going and then knocking back whiskies with melatonin to try and get to sleep at night, and suffering from crippling migraines. I would sit on the edge of my bed when I did get up thinking, "I can't do it. I can't face today. I can't do this." And just going, I've got to pull a rabbit out of a hat. Well, you can go on like that for a little while, but not for that long. So in the midst of all of that, I ended up doing a training course in my intuition.
Just before you go there, Bridget, what is it, would you say, in you at that time that had actually, up till that point, created your life that way?
It's a really brilliant question. I have to go back to the patterning that we all have in childhood. So we all become conditioned in childhood, and this is really the crux of therapy. The first 5 years of our life we go into a space of conditioning, and we have what I would call the small self, or your false identity, which is kind of running the show. So although I was on a spiritual path, and I was very much on a spiritual path, and had been for a long time, by the way, and was a therapist and a healer and a hypnotherapist and a trauma therapist, you can't always see what's going on inside of you. So it's sort of, when you're inside the bottle, you can't read the label. So I could work with my intuition and I could create things, but there was always this other part of me running the show. And that other part of me running the show just felt that I had to be, not perfect, but I had to raise the bar high and do everything really well. I had to be a brilliant mother. I had to be a brilliant therapist. I had to hold it all together. I had to be totally capable and be that very strong woman that could do everything and just keep fighting and battling my way through to the visions that I was holding at that time. So rather than let everything fall apart and go, "Okay, I haven't got any money, let's just let them foreclose on the mortgage, let the house go to auction, let's go and live in a council flat somewhere, I'll give up work and look after myself." That would have been an option. And I believe we do have like lots of future timelines that we can choose. And the timeline that I chose was to keep going rather than collapse, surrender, and let it all fall away. So there is this kind of ethic within me, as I think there are in many of us, that we've got to work hard. And especially as a woman in business, you feel like you've got to take on the masculine role and be very active and proactive and work hard and keep everything together. So I kind of became both father and mother to my children, which meant I was the breadwinner and the nurturer. So I think that's what made me continue down that pathway and create that.
Although, I mean, going back to your early sort of childhood yourself, you know, I think it's interesting how as women, we often end up in situations where we're married to the wrong person. we're choosing things that we see fit into what someone else has prescribed for us, rather than following our own kind of intuitions.
Yes, I think we do. And I think it's a difficult area because it's something we don't always see. So I think some people marry the person they think they should marry, or the person they think that their parents will approve of, or the person at the time that's attractive to them. But the problem is, if you've had dysfunctional programming and conditioning in the beginning of your life, you're like the odd piece of jigsaw, if you like, because you've been molded that way by your experiences, by your parents and your siblings and your neighbours and your school teachers and everything else, your culture, your time that you grew up. You've been molded in a particular way. So think of it as you'll have a particular shape, and that shape fits very well with somebody who's also out of shape. So you tend, if you have got shadow trauma going on, and stuff, let's say, dysfunction going on, you tend to be attracted to someone dysfunctional. So you tend to copy the patterns of your childhood. So if you had a father that was very overbearing and authoritative, say, you're probably likely, unless you do some work on that and become aware of it and become conscious of it, you're likely to be with a partner who's very authoritarian and very strict. If you had a father who was very absent, you're likely to be with someone who's absent. So those early programmings definitely shape what you do, but not just what you do. It's an unconscious pattern because it feels right. So when I met my ex-husband, I fell in love with him. I thought he was amazing. I thought, this is brilliant, when I was first with him. And it was only after a couple of years that I thought, I'm seeing cracks in this. And it was only later, when I actually trained as a therapist, that I really started to see what was playing out for him and what was playing out for me, and how that dysfunction held itself together in a very codependent way.
I also see that a lot of us don't really have the communication to really even share or listen. It's like we can't talk about these things when we're in it. It's like people fight for their dysfunction. They fight to hold that in place, because having something different to that is unknown. It's completely unrealized. And so often that's what leads to the separation, because in order to realize oneself and what's truly possible, it's almost like, in some respects, you got to walk the path alone.
Unless your partner decides to also walk that path, and even then you can split up, but it might at least be consciously. But if one person's doing the work and examining that and becoming aware, and the other person isn't, you're going to drift further and further and further apart. And I think, yes, there is a part of us that doesn't see it because we're in it, so we don't always see it, and we have to look at what's the discomfort, what's going on, how happy am I, to really go within and look at what's my truth here. So we could have a whole probably podcast about relationship dynamics and how we end up winding up with the wrong people. But the solution is really a path of, it's treading a path of both working intuitively with your greater self to go for the right sort of person, but also a path of healing some of that programming, or at least becoming aware of it so you don't allow it to run the show. And that's that path you tread to come out of dysfunctional patterns. Because often people have a dysfunctional pattern. It's not just a one relationship, it's every serious relationship they've ever had will be a pattern. And you often hear women saying, I don't know how I pick all the bastards. Well, they're creating it subconsciously.
Yeah, there's that inner position that we're holding, right? And then it's creating what's going on around us. So you mentioned earlier about, the difference between intuition and being trained in intuition, that you'd always been intuitive, but it was only when you trained in your intuition that the pieces really came in for you. You want to share a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a double Pisces, and I don't go in for horoscopes very much, but everybody who does will know that as a double Pisces, you're pretty sensitive to everything and really wide open in terms of intuition. My grandmother was very intuitive, used to sort of tell fortunes, and my mother was as well, hugely intuitive, used to tell the tea leaves and things. So come from a long line, matriarchal line of intuitive women, and have this kind of double Pisces thing. And I think as well, growing up in any kind of household where there's dysfunction, you learn to second guess, you become the empath, and you learn to guess by the walk of your mother or the look on your dad's face whether you can do this or that, what mood they're in. So you become hypersensitized to things. And I really began delving into things alternative, even as a teenager. Then moving on, as I got older, I kind of rejected that because it was the 80s and it was the thing to go to London and be, you know, worked in film PR and then public relations in those days, but felt very unhappy. And when I stopped to have children, I went right back into that sort of more alternative spiritual path. And I'd been on this spiritual path for a long time. I started meditating in the year 2000. I'd been working with NLP and healing. I became a Reiki master, all sorts of things when my children were born. So that was sort of in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I'd been on this spiritual path. And the more that I went on that spiritual path, and the more I awakened, and also the more work I was doing on myself, because I was training as a therapist then, the more open and intuitive I became. So I was very intuitive with other people. So for example, as a therapist, I could tell what was going on with this person, what I needed to do, that this particular technique would not work with them and this one would. And I would even start maybe working with a technique and I'd hear this very clear sort of voice or knowing in my head going, this isn't going to work, do this. And I would switch. So I had this intuitive knowing, and even things like my brother wanted to emanate to Australia, and I said, no, it's all going to be fine. And he was going, no, I'm not going to get the visa. It was all fine, and off he went. So when it was looking at what's going on for other people, I was highly intuitive. When it came to stuff for myself, it was much harder, because when you're looking intuitively for yourself, the intuition was there. I would get the intuitive hits, but I wouldn't always believe that they were true. And so the doubt would slip in. So, but then every so often there was one that was so strong I knew I had to do it. And one of those was Harley Street. I absolutely knew that I had to go to Harley Street. And I knew it had to be number 10 Harley Street. And when I saw the building, which was an old Georgian building, my hair stood on end, because I had dreamed of this building for years since I was a kid. And I thought I was going to live in a house like that.
Oh, wow.
And I hadn't realised.
Wow. Yeah. So those whispers of the soul, right? They come in and we hear them, we see them in dreams, we get them in instincts, but it can be over a series of many years and we don't often put the link together until a moment like that. Yeah, stunning.
Yeah. So I think that's intuition before training. Is it comes and goes, you get it. Sometimes you listen to it, sometimes you don't. When it's urgent, you listen to it. You listen to it when it's for other people, but not necessarily for yourself. And there's a whole blurred boundary. It's very nebulous, intuition, when you're not trained. It's like, is this my intuition or is it my critical voice? Is this my intuition telling me to go and work in Harley Street? Or is that my wounded self that thinks it needs to work in Harley Street to get my father's attention? You know, is it really true for me to go and live in the Midlands, for example, which I did do at one point? Or is that just something else? So there's this doubt. And also there's always a doubt, is this true, clear voice of intuition or not? So that's the first doubt. And then the second doubt is, well, I know this is intuition, but is it actually true? So should I follow through on this? So it just becomes very clouded and nebulous and uncertain. And it's a little sort of bit on, off, on, off. You can have intuition, you'll be driving your car and you stop at the traffic lights and you have this massive intuitive hit and that's great. And then when you get home and you want to do something, where's your intuition? So it's almost like you're at the beck and call of your intuition. That's natural intuition. But when you're trained, it's a whole different ball game, because when you're trained in your intuition, you tap into your intuition at will, when you want to tune into what you want to tune into. And you know it, you come to know it as your true north. So you know it's true. So then you're willing to take the risks.
Yes. Okay. So this leads us on to you choosing that actually you're done in London and you want to go to Cape Town, pretty much, and a few other things besides.
Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? It doesn't quite happen like that. So I was on this intuitive training, and in my head, I didn't want to go to Cape Town. In my head, I still loved London. In my head, what I was going to do was do this intuitive training, and I wanted to create a life where I was less stressed, where my children had left, and maybe I downsized, and maybe I met some nice man, and maybe I ended up getting married again, and maybe it would work this time, otherwise I was giving up, and I'm going to go on a spiritual journey, and perhaps I'd become a famous therapist and I'd start working with a lot of celebrities or something of that ilk. So I'd become...
That's what you had chosen for yourself.
That's what I chosen for myself. I'm going to get over this very difficult period. I'm going to get over this burnout. My kids are going to leave and go to university. I'm going to get my act together. I'm going to start seeing top celebrity type or famous people type clients. I'm going to make a name for myself. I'm going to be a famous therapist. So that was kind of my plan. Was never, ever, ever to leave London. But your intuition often has a completely different idea. So as we went through this 9-month training, it became obvious that I was going to go off to South Africa, and I thought it was going to be a holiday at first. So I looked at my diary, and the first time I could go was June. And now June in South Africa is the middle of winter, and it's cold and miserable, and I thought, I'm not paying all that money to go somewhere cold and miserable. I'll wait to the end of the training and I'll go in October. So I blocked off 3 weeks in my diary to go in October, which would have been after the training. And as somebody who works for themselves, you have to block off time, otherwise you'll never get it. So there it was. My holiday in South Africa was set in stone. But during that 9 months, it just became more and more obvious that I was going to leave, and I was going to actually go and live in South Africa. I wasn't just going on holiday. And I was going to resign from Harley Street, and I was going to pack up all my stuff and rent out my flat. And this was terrifying. And I remember getting to the end of the training and saying, I was so angry and annoyed and upset. I said, I haven't created my man, and I haven't created my celebrity clients and all this stuff. And they said, oh, but you've created your heart. And I said, what do you mean? They said, you're doing what you love. And I said, what do you mean? They said, you're going to Cape Town. I said, I don't know I love Cape Town. I've never been to Cape Town in my life. I've never been to South Africa in my life. I love London. What are you talking about? And they kept going, no, no, no. And it was a very difficult pill to swallow. And I had to. I'm one of these people who can be quite a daredevil. If somebody dares me to do something, unless it involves cold water, I'll do it. And I just thought, I'm also somebody who tests things out to the max, which is what made me a good therapist, because I had a lot of different tools in the therapy box. So I'd go and train in something and I'd test it out to the max, and I'd take what worked and use it. And I thought, I'm never going to know if this training works, this intuitive stuff works, this hero's journey. I don't know if this is going to work unless I test it to the max. And I am being called here to go and live in South Africa, give up my work and give up my flat. And if I don't do this, I will never know if this is right or not. So it was scary, but I decided to do it. I resigned from Harley Street. I kind of wound up my work with clients at home. My kids went off to university. I packed up my flat, got rid of 80% of what I owned, rented it out to 3 young, wonderful working people who were going to pay me rent, and put a few things in storage with my niece in her loft, and I got 1 suitcase to bring to South Africa. Now, it was quite exciting. It was like, at the beginning, it was exciting. I was, I'm going to go and live in South Africa, you know. And actually, by the time I'd resigned from Harley Street, it takes 6 months to put your resignation in and get rid of your room, which is why you have to stay, because the overheads are huge. By the time I'd actually left Harley Street, I was so relieved, because I was so burnt out. I couldn't have carried on. I just thought it was right. Okay, it was right to leave Harley Street. That gave me a straw to clutch at. And my kids went off to university, and the nearer it got to going to Cape Town, the worse it was, because I started to get really panicky. And as I was throwing away things that I'd had for years, literally taking carloads of things to the dump or the charity shop, or bin liners of clothes to people I know, and giving away all my cookery books and all sorts of things, I would just be, my heart would be in my throat, and my heart would just be absolutely thumping, and I'd be shaking with fear, thinking, I'm throwing away my life. It's taken me all these years to prove myself as a therapist and get to Harley Street and have a waiting list in Harley Street and actually make it work. It's taken me all these years to do enough therapy on myself to be free of this marriage. It's taken me all these years to look after my kids and bring them up. And I've achieved this status in life, and I'm about to throw it down the drain. I'm about to throw the whole thing away. I'm making the biggest mistake of my life and I can't come back.
Did that feel like it was like based on a whim almost, because your intuition had sort of told you and you'd not got anything foundational to base that on?
It felt more like it was a dare than a whim, because my intuition was telling me. It was more like, oh, I'll show you whether this stuff works or not. It was this defiant daredevil feeling. I suppose, I don't like heights, but I suppose if you're going to do a bungee jump, you'd feel that, or you're going to do a paraglide. You know, you said you're going to do it. You said you're going to parachute out of an aeroplane for charity, and now you're starting to get shaky legs because it's a long way up. And what happens if I die, and things like that. So, but you're daredevil and you're going to do it because you're not going to let everybody down. And it was a little bit like that. I'm not going to let everybody down. And again, that goes back to your own programming and your subconscious mind. Your small self, my small self was going, but nobody will love me and I'll be rejected because they'll say that I didn't follow through, you know, and all this stuff. So the self-talk was quite interesting. But I remember that 3 weeks before leaving, my son had gone up to Nottingham University and he got into a fight, a whole town and gown type thing. He was out late with a friend and some of the boys from the town came in and just decided to beat up the friend, and Henry, my son, stood in to defend his friend and got his jaw broken in the process. So the things like that, I was thinking, I can't go to Cape Town. My son's got a jaw broken, he's in hospital, I've got to go up and find him and look after him. So there's all sorts of things like that. I remember literally throwing things away and just thinking, I love that thing, and then crying because I was thinking, I love that painting, or I love that lampstand, or that kitchen set, or whatever it was. And I've had it for years and all the memories that go with it, and I'm just chucking it on the dump or leaving it at the charity shop. And actually I did make some mistakes. There's things I should have kept which I didn't, and things I kept which I should have thrown away, but that's irrelevant. But I just kept thinking, what am I going to do? And it was terrifying. I have to tell you, it's not an easy thing, like, oh yeah, I'd like to go to Cape Town, oh yes, let's go book the flight. It's not like that. It was terrifying. We would call them dragons or demons, were coming up left, right and centre and hitting me in the face. What the hell are you doing? You're throwing your life away. And in the end, what I decided was I'd rented my flat out for a year and I'd got my ticket, and I couldn't get a visa for South Africa then, so I had to be back within 3 months. So I came out here in October 2012 and I had a ticket to go back sort of for Christmas 2012. And I said to myself, to reassure myself, because I was going crazy, that I was just going on a long extended summer holiday to Cape Town. I was going to lie on a beach and rest and relax, and I was going to see how it was. And if it didn't work, then I knew this intuition stuff was rubbish and I would just go back. And I had all these options because I was renting out my flat for a year, so I could go travelling anywhere I wanted to, which was quite appealing. I could go and sort of live in a cottage in Wales or something. I could go back to London and live in a small flat, like a small one-bedroom flat somewhere in North London, and just, you know, live on the rent. Or I could go back to London and I could start, like, I used to do fertility work with women. I used to work a lot with hypnosis and therapy to help people, women who couldn't get pregnant, to get pregnant. And that was quite a nice work. And I also used to work with things like weight stuff and eating disorders. And I thought, I've really got a name for myself with that. And I could go back and I could do that. And it doesn't have to be Harley Street. I could go into some small place. So I had all these backup plans, all these plan Bs that were going to happen. And I'd never been to Cape Town in my life, and I didn't know anybody here when I decided to come and bought the ticket. And then all kinds of magic starts happening, you see, when you follow your intuition. So the first piece of magic was that a mutual friend of ours, Ryan Pinnock, who had been living in London for a long time but was from Cape Town, decided he was going to come back to Cape Town to hang out with his family and spend some time here. He was actually only here for 2 years, I think, and then went back to London. And he arrived in Cape Town, I think it was something like 3 weeks before me. And he said, I'll meet you from the airport. So I had a friendly face meeting me from the airport. Didn't really see much of him after that, but had a friendly face meeting me from the airport. There was another friend who was on the training who had been to Cape Town. And right at the last minute, I realised I'd sorted out all my belongings and sewn up everything with my business and Harley Street and clients and family. And I hadn't thought about where am I going to stay when I get to Cape Town. So about a week before I left, I just rang this friend and said, where do you stay in Cape Town? And she said, I stay in a shanty lodge, which is a backpacker's lodge. And I went, right. And I rang them and booked that. So that was another piece of magic. Then literally 2 weeks before I left, a friend of mine, a Facebook friend, I didn't really know her that well. I'd done a training with her years before. She'd been another student on a healing training that I'd done. She said, oh, I've got a friend who lives in Cape Town, I'll put you in touch with her. And she was English. Her name's Emma, I still know her today. She lives back in England. So she was English, she was married to a Cape Townian, and she was living in Cape Town, and she happened to be in London, and just as they put us in touch. So she came to my flat and she said, you don't need that, you do need that, you do need that, get rid of that and keep your television. So she was great. She was my angel in Cape Town when I arrived. She was working full time, so she didn't have much time for me, but I'd see her at the weekends, we'd go places. And then in the June before I left, I went up to Stonehenge to go on a spiritual trip with Doctors JJ and Desiree Hurtak, who brought through the teaching the Keys of Enoch, which I'd been part of for about 16, 17 years. So I went up to hang out with them and the gang and to do this sacred site thing. I think there was a crop circle as well there, and we were going to Glastonbury, the usual kind of spiritual thing. And there was a lady there called Bronwyn, who was South African, and she said, when you get to the Cape, get in touch with me. I have a study group and you can come and study the Keys with me. And I still know her today. She's still here. So that was 3 contacts. And just before I left, in absolute panic, my older brother said he would sell my car for me, which was great. And from the money from that, I was able to get an old car here. And the other thing that happened is my younger brother, he has in-laws in South Africa. And he'd been to the Cape a lot, and he's a wine taster, he's a wine buff. So he knew the Cape really well. He knew all the Cape farm winelands and the wine farms. And he turned around, and we always speak about wine, obviously, because he's a wine buff. And he said to me, Bridget, and I said, yeah. And he said, you know you really love red wine? I said, yeah. And he said, but there's one white wine you like. And I went, yeah. And he said, Gewürztraminer. And I went, yeah. And Riesling. I said, yes. He said, and I told you you'd like them. And I went, yes. And he said, and you told me you wouldn't. And I said, yes. And he said, but you did. I said, yeah. He said, well, I know you're going to like Cape Town. Just the same as I knew you were going to like those 2 white wines. Oh. So I thought, okay. Well, I got here. I wasn't certain. It's always you're on tenterhooks. There's nothing quite as exhilarating as travelling as a single woman on your own in a place you've never been to that everybody's telling you is dangerous. So I was a little bit on tenterhooks when I arrived, but settled in quite quickly, and a whole series of magical things happened. And by the time I went back in December for Christmas, I decided I was going to come back again in January, and I've never gone back. And I now have my South African ID, I have a permanent residence, I've built a house here, and I've married a South African.
You've built a house and married a South African, yeah, and your residency.
Yeah.
So building the house would have been a whole nother journey, let alone finding a new husband and creating a whole new relationship. You want to tell us a little bit about that? Because all of it sounds very magical.
Okay, so let's tell you a little bit about the man first, shall we? So I kind of knew intuitively from that training that there was a man somewhere in the background, and this is what happens is your intuition gives you a bit of information, and then your programmed conditioned small self or identity, false identity, goes, oh, and it makes something up about it. So I knew there was going to be a man, but it wasn't very distinct, it wasn't very clear, but I kind of knew he was South African. And interestingly, about 3 years previously to that, I'd done a big meditation when I was teaching a healing class, and I'd got this vision of this man, and I knew he was going to be dark-haired, and I knew he had a strange accent, but he spoke English. And I thought it was maybe mid-Atlantic. He wasn't Australian, it wasn't American, well, it was South African. But anyway, I kind of knew there was going to be somebody. But my little me, in my false conditioned self, kind of had this vision that I was going to get off the plane and meet him, or I was going to meet him while I was sitting on the plane. He was going to be sitting next to me, and he was going to whisk me off, and I was going to meet him. And that's not how it happened at all. I was actually here for over 10 months on my own, which was brilliant, because what it did was it allowed me to put my roots down here. I did a lot of dancing, a lot of yoga. I got to know a lot of people. I got to know the area, lived in different places, got a life together, and also did some work on myself, because when you're really, really busy, you haven't got time to do anything on yourself. And I knew there was trauma to clear, and that I had to also overcome and process what had happened to me in those 3 years before coming to Cape Town. So I got to the point, it was winter here, and I'd been writing my book, Red Dress, and I'd been stuck in this small 1-bedroom apartment place. It looked like a hobbit house. It was designed by Rudolf Steiner. It was very unusual, and it was part of a much bigger house, which they called the Magic House. But I lived there for a while, and I'd been sitting there with, and it's freezing, by the way, in Cape Town, and there's no heating. So I was sitting there with a jacket and a bobble hat and a scarf and gloves at my typewriter, typing all week long. And it got to Friday night, and I thought, oh, do you know what? I'm going to go to Bay Harbour Market. So Bay Harbour Market is a market in Hout Bay, which had been going for about a year at that time. And it was a great place to go because there was always music, it was warm, there would be a fire, there's like, you could get a glass of wine, you can get food. There was a lady there that sold really funky clothes, and I knew her enough to talk to her. So I'm going to go down to Hout Bay Market, I'm going to get myself warm. And so off I go, it's freezing, I've got layers and layers. I get to Hout Bay Market, and there's a really great band on, and I'm dancing, and I love dancing, it's one of my passions. And I'm dancing, and as I'm dancing, I'm getting hotter and hotter, and as I'm dancing, I'm taking layers of clothes off. And unbeknownst to me, there's a man with his friends standing at the bar watching, and the friends go, hey, what about that chick over there? And she goes, oh yeah, I fancy her. So he comes up, and he'd been single for a long time and been kind of waiting. And he kept saying he was waiting, he was waiting. He knew somebody, the right person would come, he was waiting. And he'd been divorced about 6 years previously, I think. And so he came up and started talking to me, and we just chatted, and that's how we met. And we didn't get it together straight away, we just kind of left it at that, and a couple of weeks later I went to the market again, and he was there, and then we got together. So that's how I met him. We didn't actually get married for about another 3 years, and my kids came out too. My daughter was the compere, and my son gave me away, and it was great. My stepson was there, he's a lovely lad as well. So we had a fantastic day with friends and family, and we got married. But we needed somewhere to live, and we were just renting a very old, small cottage under the mountain in the middle of Cape Town, and we needed somewhere to live. And we were looking for somewhere, and this place was too small for both of us and my stuff and all this, and I decided that I was going to look for, I made a decision intuitively that I was going to sell my flat in London and halve the money and buy a much, much smaller flat in London and take the other half and buy a house somewhere in Cape Town. But that's not what happened. What happened was I was looking for this place because I knew what it looked like. I knew that it was very light and airy with huge great windows. I knew that there was an island kitchen. I knew it was really modern. I knew that it had an incredible view of the mountains. I knew that it was near the ocean. I knew I could hear the sea from there, and I knew that it had a winding road that went down to the sea and then back towards Cape Town. That's all I knew. And I kind of knew what it looked like. So I was looking and looking and looking for this house, and I couldn't find it. Meanwhile, I shipped the stuff that had been in storage because my niece had moved, and our house was packed with boxes of my stuff from London, and there wasn't room for it, and we really needed to get out. So one day I was looking in the back of the Sunday paper, which had properties, and I saw this picture of the view, and I said to my husband, that's the house. And he looked and he went, that's not a house, that's just a plot of land. So again, intuition, tapped in, no, you need to go and look at this piece of land. I looked at the piece of land and I got shivers all up my arms. I went down, squatted and put my hands on the ground and felt the soil. And the agent was this older, mature man, older agent, old boy, and he looked round and he looked at me, and I thought, I don't care what he thinks, I'm just feeling the land, I'm feeling the energy of this land. And I just knew I needed to buy this piece of land. And it had been standing vacant for 20 years. Every piece of land around it had sold. People had tried to buy this piece of land and nobody could buy it. And unbelievably, I had no money. And they said, no, you need to put a deposit down. I said, I can't put a deposit down until I've sold my flat. And under English law, I can't put my flat up on the market until my tenants leave. And under English law, I'm not going to get that money to. They couldn't understand English law, but anyway, they accepted it. And they said, well, can you just give us something as a token? And I said, all I've got is about £1,000. They said, that's fine.
Wow.
And then when it came to it, the people that owned the piece of land were South African. They were going to build a house here. It didn't happen. They emigrated to England and they lived in Bournemouth. And they wanted to be paid in pounds. And I was selling a flat in London in pounds. I did the same thing with my car, by the way. I bought a car to somebody who needed pounds, and I bought it in pounds because it's difficult to bring money across. So anyway, I bought the piece of land, and then it took a year for me to sell my flat, bring my stuff over, I had to put it in storage and work with this architect. And there's a whole magic, there's magic over magic over magic of intuition with this house. The first thing that happened is we were looking around at houses, and there were some beautiful, beautiful houses in the Cape, which are kind of glass, very modern glass and wood. We said, we love this house, who made them? We found out who the architect was, and he was an Italian architect. And we invited him to come to the land, and he was very arrogant. A lot of architects are very arrogant, very arrogant. He sniffed at what we were doing, and when we told him the budget, he just laughed and walked away. And my husband went, oh, I know an architect. I said, do you? And he said, yes, he's an award-winning architect. And I used to go to university with him, and I know him from when we lived in Joburg. And he literally gets on his phone, and he says, hello, John. He says, I always knew this day would happen. Can you build me a house? And so we worked with this award-winning architect, very sort of brutalism type architecture, lots of big slabs of concrete and huge windows. And he's designed a couple of the modern wine farms in the Cape. He's quite a well-known architect, and because he was a friend of my husband's, we ended up using him. So he came, and then we talked about what I wanted in the house. And then right near the end, I'd given him the budget, I'd given him how many rooms we wanted, what sort of thing we wanted, and right at the end I said, oh, and I want it feng shuied, but I can do that because I used to do feng shui. Right at the end I said, and I want sacred geometry. And he turned around, I thought, oh, what have I done? He's going to think this idiot. And he turned around, he said, I did my thesis in sacred geometry.
Wow.
And I nearly fell off my chair. So our house is an amazing modern house. It's actually been featured on some architectural talk he went to, because it was done on a budget. So normally he wouldn't be used to doing something on a budget. So it was done on a budget. It's nearly all glass and concrete. We have magnificent views to the front of the mountains, and to the side we have magnificent views over the ocean. And it's just the most incredible house. Yeah. So we have sacred geometry. We have this huge circle in the middle of a square at the top of the house, which goes double height. So if you're sitting at the dining table and you look up, you're looking up double height to a big skylight at the top that's got the Shiantra on it. So it's incredibly spiritual. It's all done on Fibonacci stuff and golden mean and things like that. So
Wow.
And to watch it being created was also amazing in terms of really going for the vision, to watch him as an architect sketch something on a piece of paper. And this house is pretty much what he sketched on that piece of paper. And whenever the builder said, oh, we can't do that, or the structural engineer would go, no, that's not possible. He'd go, no, I want it this way. And they go, no, well, we'll do it this way. And he'd go, no, I want it this way. And he just held the vision, held what he wanted, and went, no, we want it this way. And it got created. It took a year, but it got created.
Just a year. That's pretty good, though.
Yeah. For me, I was thinking it's going to be 3 months, and I was like champing at the bit. And we moved in 7 years ago, just literally the day before Christmas. There's so much magic about it. The house is called Eagle, and every time we came to this piece of land to look at it, there were eagles circling over the top. And the day we moved in, it was the middle of summer. It's normally hot, sunny, as it is today. It poured with rain. You wouldn't believe it. It was like a baptism. It poured with rain. The removal guys got soaking wet. All of our stuff got soaking wet. And as the removal guys left, the rain stopped. The sun came out. I looked over to where the sun was, and there were 6 eagles circling high up in the sky.
So whilst this is going on, you're also writing your book, aren't you? You're writing The Red Dress. Yes. And building a house, and falling in love and getting married. And so it's quite an incredible, because I've read your book, and what I loved about it is that it's such a page turner. And I'm somebody who used to read loads of books and then lost all interest, and haven't really picked up a book unless it's something pertinent to work for a long time. It's just, I'll read a bit and then I'll put it down. But I could not, once I started, I just had to finish this book. So much mastery in your tension, in creating the tension in the story. It was really fabulous. So, but I think that was also, from what I understand, part of your intuitive guidance to write this book. It wasn't like you had decided, I'm going to write a book. It wasn't something that you'd chosen for yourself. I'm going to write.
No, I never did. I was never one of those people that used to think, I'm going to write a book one day. There's a book in me. I just wasn't that person. But again, loads of magic. So, like you, I used to read a lot, and then life gets in the way, and all the books I was reading were about therapy. Then all the books I was reading were about personal development or about intuition, or, you know, they're all factual books. Or then, of course, I teach the Keys of Enoch, so I'm reading a lot of the Academy for Future Science material. So very rarely get to read a novel, and for me that's a bit of a treat when you go on holiday. So what I got guided to do was to write a book. Sorry, first of all, it was just write a book. You're going to write a book. Oh no, you know. I knew I could write a non-fiction because I used to work in public relations, and I used to write articles and press releases and things. And I used to write a lot for clients when I was a therapist. You know, I'd write them techniques that they could use. I'd write it out for them. I'd write things out on my website. So I knew I could write a non-fiction. I never thought I could write a fiction. And it was so bizarre because I got the intuitive hit that I was going to write a book, and I was railing against it. No, I'm not going to write a book. That's ridiculous. That, just as I'm thinking that, just after I've did this coaching call actually, where I knew I was going to write a book, the door knocked. Somebody knocked at my door. Now, this was when I first moved to Cape Town. I didn't know anybody. So I thought, who the heck is at my door? So I look out the window just to check it's not somebody dodgy, and it looks like this perfectly nice guy. And I open the door, and this guy says, oh, hi, my name is, I can't remember his name, I'm ashamed to say, but I can't remember his name, because this is 11 years ago, and he just went, I live across the road from you. It's my wife's birthday tonight. We know you've just moved in and you're on your own. Would you like to come to a party? And I went, oh, no, I'd love to come to a party. What time? He said, come round over about 6 o'clock. So I rock up at 6 o'clock with a bottle of wine. I walk in. And it turns out that his wife is an author. And the whole party is full of writers, authors, and teachers, English teachers, you know, people who teach creative writing, university, stuff like that. So the whole thing is a literary party, basically. And it was like a sign, yes, you're going to write a book. So that was the first thing. And then just before I met my husband, I'd started writing it, and I put it off for a long time. I procrastinated a long time because I just thought, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And eventually I went into a meditative state. I literally went into a meditation, and I just did this whole kind of journey work inside my mind. And then I got this voice, open your eyes and start typing. And I literally opened my eyes and I started typing. And as I started typing, I was thinking, this is a little bit like my life in London. Because it is loose, very, very loosely. It's a fiction, it's total fiction. But there's bits of it that are loosely based on my life. So I was thinking, no, this is a bit too close to home. But I carried on writing. I thought, don't stop, just keep going. And originally the character was called Kirsty because I'd just been talking to a friend of mine called Kirsty. And I went for a walk on the beach afterwards. I thought, I can't call her Kirsty. And I came back and she'd got changed to Katie. And then it just unraveled. It unrolled, or unfolded, should I say, rather than unraveled. It unfolded. And I would sit and work on that book and just write the next bit, write the next bit. I'd go into a meditative state, I'd open my eyes, I'd write the next bit. And then about 3 years later, I'd written that book, and I sent it off to a publisher, and they went, we love the writing, and we love the story, but it's not really structured like a novel. I thought, no, it's not. It's vignettes that I've written intuitively. They said, you need to really structure it as a novel. So I worked with a brilliant editor who sort of coached me a little bit on how to make plot points and hold tension. And I did some work with my daughter actually about characterization, because she's a writer, but she's also trained in theatre and acting. And acting is all about creating and developing a character. So she's brilliant at how to create characters. So I worked with her to create the characters, and I worked with the editor to look at structure and plot points. And then it took me another 3 years to completely rewrite Red Dress. And I'm about a third of the way through the sequel, but that's kind of been put on the back burner for a while. So the whole thing was magical. Even the publisher was a friend of mine here, who's very, very intuitive, and she does a lot of readings and things, runs a fabulous healing school. And she said to me one day, she asked me to give a talk, which I did, at a local place, which she ran, called the 8 O'Clock Club. And she said to me, I think you need to contact John Hunt Publishing. And it was like, oh, okay. And I contacted John Hunt Publishing, and they went, yes, and they took it, and they published the book. They've since changed names. I think they're now something Inc.
Right.
books.
Wow.
But anyway, so everything was no, you know, having to go through a directory of publishers or ring lots of publishers or write to nothing like that. It was just this. I knew I was going to get it published. A couple of publishers had said it's well written, but there's no story, and rejected it. And I kind of let it go. I'd put it out there and chosen that I wanted a publisher, and then this friend came in and said, contact John Hunt.
Mm. Yeah, fabulous. And that just speaks to the shortcut intuitive guidance gives us when we're really utilizing it, isn't it? It's just like cuts out all the periphery and all the distraction and all the efforting and all the stuff that we get caught up in if we're not really tuned in and paying attention and applying it. So what an amazing story.
I've got so many up my sleeve, honestly, Liz. I mean, another one who reminded me about just cutting through everything. I needed a car. Have I got time to just tell you this quick story about the car? So I come to the Cape. I haven't really got that much money. Well, I'm worried about money. I probably had more money than I thought, but I was worried about it. So I was renting a magical thing of finding where I lived. I won't go into that story because that's another whole story. So I magically find this place to live. And this friend of mine, Emma, has got a friend who rents out cheap cars. So I'm renting this cheap car and it's really cheap and it's awful and it's leaking petrol and it's horrible to drive. And I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. I need to get something better. So I upgrade to a slightly better hire car with a proper hire car company, but it's still not great. And I know that I can't keep spending money on car hire. I need to get myself a car. So I say to Em, I need to get myself a car. And she says, well, what you need to do is, and she lists out all these things. You need to go on, you know, this website, and you need to look at different cars, and you need to see what prices they are, and you need to make sure that you've got the money, and you need to take somebody. And I just thought, so I went, yeah. I said, no, I'm going to do this intuitively. So I just thought, I just put it out there to the universe. I need a car that I can afford. And I thought, maybe I'll buy a little Golf or something like that, VW Golf or something like that. So put it out there. Literally the next day, I get a phone call. I get a phone call from a woman who is my brother's wife's aunt. So it's a very distant relation. So my sister, it's basically my sister-in-law's aunt, and she's South African. And she knows I'm here, and I've met her in England at my brother's house. And she rings me up and she says, oh, Dad, just seeing how you're doing now. You've got to South Africa. And I said, I'm doing well. And she said, now she lives on the garden route. She said, we're in Cape Town. Would you like to meet for a cup of coffee or something? I said, yeah, sure. She tells me where to go. I've never been there before. I find my little map book. It was the days before sat-nav. I find my map book. I drive to this place. I meet this woman and her husband, quite a bit older than me. We're sitting in a cafe. They buy me a cup of tea and a croissant or something. And then she suddenly goes, now, have you got a car? And I went, no, actually, I need to get a car. And she goes, you need to contact my brother-in-law who lives in Constantia in Cape Town. He's a car dealer and he'll find you a car. Here's his number. So I get home and I ring him and I tell him what I want. And he said, well, I haven't got a Golf. They actually hold their price. It's probably more than you've got. He said, but I have got a car for you. I said, okay. So he said, can you get here? I said, yeah, I've got a hire car. So I go over and see this car. And it's a thing called a Taz, which is, they're really a township car, but it was such a fun car. It was only 4 gears, no central locking. It was an old car, hey, but it worked really, really well. And I drove it around and it's much better than my clapped out hire car. And I go, okay, well, how much is it? And I wanted to pay 33,000 rand. And he said something like 35,000, whatever it is he said. And I said, well, I only want to pay whatever it was. And he goes, no. He said, pay the full price. But I said, okay, but you're going to put a new radio in here and a new CD player and a sound system, because the sound system wasn't good. So he goes, okay, you're on. I said, and then the other thing is, how do I collect it from you and how do I pay you? Because I haven't got a South African bank account. He said, that's okay, because he's English, lives here. That's okay, I've got a bank account in England, you can pay me in pounds. I said, well, how do I collect it? He said, well, what are you doing now? And I said, well, I'm dropping off my hire car next week and I'm going to England for a few weeks. And then I'm back on whatever the date, the 6th. And he said, I'll come and pick you up from the airport in your new car. You can drop me off at a garage that I need to go to anyway, and a friend of mine will bring me home and you'll have your car. So I ended up getting a car, and I had that car for a good couple of years. until I magically created the next car, but that's another whole story. But it's the same thing. I didn't have to phone anybody. I didn't have to go and look at anything. I didn't have to do anything. Even the transaction was easy because I could do it in pounds.
Oh,
This is
beautiful.
the value of
But
working intuitively
yeah.
rather than logically.
So, Bridget, you host something called the Bone Circle. Is that in your home in South Africa, or it's a group gathering, right? It's where people come
It's
and
actually, sorry, it's actually an entire training. So in 2017, another story for you. 2017, I used to go burlesque dancing. I love dancing, and I decided to do burlesque. And I met this girl there, and her life was, I wouldn't say it was a mess, but it was very challenging. She was a single parent with 2 boys, working full time, trying to do her burlesque on the side. And she was lovely, and I wanted to get to know her a bit better. So we met for coffee one Saturday morning. We started talking, and she told me a bit about her life. And I just went to her, at those days, I used to do a little bit of coaching. I don't do that now. I said, you need to do the coaching with me. But unfortunately, you can't afford me because I'm still on Harley Street fees. So we talked about it, and on the way home I thought, well, I know about 3 or 4 people who should do the coaching with me but can't afford it. What if they all grouped together and I did them all at once and coached them all together? So I just thought, let's see if this is true. Let's put an email out. So I sent an email out to about 30 people, and I got 15 people saying, yes, we'd like to do this with you. 5 of which wanted to do it online, and the other 10 at my house. This is 2017. And I thought, I can't coach all those people. It's not the same. I need to actually make this into a training. So I went again intuitively. I structured the course. I trained in it. I even intuitively got the name, the Bone Circle. And I was reading Women Who Run with the Wolves. And at the time, it keeps talking about the bones and gathering the bones and the bones and all of this stuff. And I just knew it was right. And I taught that training over a year. And everybody wanted me to do it again. But remember I told you I was really, really burnt out in London? Well, that came back to bite me because I always knew my body would, at some point pay the price of burning out. And that's about the time it started to really pay the price of burning out. I had heavy metal poisoning. I had severe black mold poisoning. I was going through menopause, and I'd built a house, and I'd done too much. And then I was teaching this thing and holding the space, and my body just went, nope. So I became quite sick. So I finished the training and said, I'll teach it again. But then I got really sick, and then I got into the book, and then I was launching the book, and then I just didn't have the energy really to devote to this thing. And intuitively, I didn't feel I needed to do it then. But it's come back. So what happened is I got a whole load of kind of intuitive downloads to tweak it and make it even better, to let go of some of the stuff that I don't think was necessary or didn't work very well, and to bring in other stuff that's to do with my spiritual path, spiritual lifestyle stuff, and also stuff that was to do with my healing and therapy path. So it's a trinity. It all works in trinity. So it's about the past, which is healing your past and letting go of your past and being free of the past that's conditioning you. We talked about that earlier with relationships and stuff. It's about lifestyle and spiritual practice to be fully present and enjoy your life and be grounded and centered in it. And it's also about intuition and creating. And the bones are these truth bombs or pearls of wisdom, or wisdom keys that unlock the universe. And so that's what the bones are. And I started teaching it again online at the beginning of this year, and it was just too much for me because I wasn't fully recovered enough. I mean, I'm absolutely well, but my body needs to recharge itself now. And it was just too much, and I was right. And then I got intuitively, and also I was kind of talked into it. That's the thing you've got to be aware of, other people talking you into things. Because other people were going, why don't you teach it again? It was a brilliant course. Why don't you teach it again? I was going, no, I'm not ready. Teach it again. No, I want to write my next book. And I did it because I felt now I ought to do it. You see, beware of I ought to or I should. And that was a big mistake. So it wasn't really true for me to teach it again. So I shelved it. And then what I got intuitive was write the book, The Bone Circle. So I am now 3 chapters into writing a non-fiction book of the Bone Circle training, and eventually it'll go online. So that's my work at the moment.
That's so gorgeous, Bridget. Thank you so much for sharing.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for asking me. It's been so lovely to connect with you again.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would share it and follow the podcast. To reach out to Bridget, check the show notes for her website details. And if you'd love to participate in Thrive, my 6-week immersion, also follow the show notes for more details and information on how to enroll. Thank you for listening.